Good morning, everyone. Welcome to SciFiDevCon 2023. My name is Alon Muranek, and I work for Synopsys, where I manage R&D for the Seeker agents. Seeker, in case you haven't heard about it, or rather haven't heard about it yet, is probably the best IAST tool out there today. But as fascinating as application security is in general and IAST is in particular, it's just not my topic today. So this is the last time I'm going to mention Seeker. Instead, today, I want to talk about toxicity, specifically accidental toxicity. What is it, how we identify it, and hopefully how we fix a situation of accidental toxicity if we're caught in it. Now, in case the graphic here didn't tip you off, I'm going to be referencing Rick and Morty, specifically the 6th episode of the 3rd season, Rest and Relaxation. If you haven't seen it, the 20-second cliff note is that Rick and Morty visit this alien spa. They undergo treatment that extracts their toxins, but the toxic parts of their personalities gain sentience and all hell break loose until at the end they are luckily reabsorbed back into Rick and Morty. Honestly, although that was a horrible description of the episode, it misses most of the fun in it. I do recommend you just go and watch it. So before we jump into things, just fair disclosure, I'm an engineering manager. I'm not a psychologist. There's a more than fair chance that I'll be using terms here that aren't 100% clinically correct or are inaccurate. I hope you'll excuse me, this is not my day job, but I hope I will get my point through. Anyway, as I was saying, I am not a psychologist, but as I said, I am an engineering manager, emphasis being on manager, not on engineering. Now, if you strip away all the mumbo jumbo, and I'll be honest, in the application security world, we have a lot of mumbo jumbo. My job is to help people with strong personalities, myself included, quite often myself more than others, get along with each other. So hopefully over the years, I've picked up a thing or two about toxicity. So what is toxicity? If we start with the WebMD definition, a toxic person is anyone whose behavior adds negativity and upset to your life. Well, that's great, but that's a bit too broad for this talk. We can think about roughly 3 broad categories of toxic people. Some people actually enjoy inflicting suffering and negativity on others. We call these people bullies. This talk is not about them. Some people just don't have the empathy to care about the negativity they inflict about others. This is a psychological condition, or there's in fact a whole range of psychological conditions around that. As I said, I'm not a psychologist and I'm not really qualified to talk about these people. I want to talk about a very narrow but very common category of toxic people, or at least toxic behaviors. I want to talk about accidental toxicity. Accidental toxicity is when you or anyone acts in a toxic way without the intention of being toxic. Now, maybe you might call me an optimist. I'm sure Rick will just call me an idiot. But I truly believe that most toxic people, or most people who exhibit toxic behaviors, are doing so by accident. Deep down, I think that most of us are not horrible people. And when we act in a way that is toxic towards others, it's not out of malice, it's not out of indifference, it's just out of obliviousness. And just to clarify, if we're talking about the work environment, because that's why we are all here today, it's not all rainbows and puppies, and I don't think anyone expects it to be. Deep down, let's be honest, work isn't always fun. I mean, I love my job, and I think a lot of us in the high-tech industry at least like our jobs and choose our jobs based on at least some parameter of enjoyment or fulfillment. But this isn't the core, right? Work most often, by definition, isn't fun, or at least isn't always fun. We all do things we don't necessarily enjoy doing, and we all do things that we do not find fulfilling. Why? Because they are important for the job, and we enjoy other things like being paid and being able to afford rent and healthcare and food and stuff like that. So doing things that aren't 100% fun, or having other people in your work environment do things that aren't 100% fun, it isn't toxicity, isn't even accidental toxicity. If my manager assigns me a horrible customer bug that has to be solved by end of day, and it's a lot of work and very tedious and very annoying because I don't get all the full information from the customer, and there's a whole lot of back and forth over a Zoom call with horrible quality, and I can't understand the customer's accent and he can't understand mine. This definitely isn't fun. I'll definitely not feel great by the end of the day, but this doesn't make my manager toxic. The problem is there and it has to be solved. Though if there's a series of these and same manager always assigns me these horrible tasks and not others, even though sometimes others may be more qualified or at least equally qualified for this, then maybe you are seeing a toxic behavior from them. But I'm getting ahead of myself, sorry. Let's see a couple more examples of accidental toxicity. Starting, of course, with this episode, rest and relaxation, Rick-laxation. First of all, because I need to justify the talk and I need to justify the graphics, but also it has some really very good examples, very insightful examples once you pause and think about them. So who in this episode is being toxic? Well, obviously Rick. Rick is a toxic character throughout the series. His whole character definition is being a toxic person. But specifically in this episode, at the very beginning of this episode, there's an iconic scene that has become so famous that it's a meme now. Morty's just about to ask Jessica out. Rick drags him away. 20 minutes adventure in and out. And they end up being stuck there for 6 days. But the fact that Rick gave a horrible time assessment doesn't make him toxic. I'm sure we're all software engineers here. We give bad time estimates 4 times a day and twice on Monday, right? The point here is that Rick puts his own needs before Morty's. He just shows up, drags Morty away. Morty explicitly says he's not interested. He wants to go to school. He wants to ask out Jessica, but Rick puts his needs first and drags him away to this adventure. Now, most of us don't get dragged away into portals and 6-day adventures on alien worlds, but did you ever have a coworker or manager that needs something that you think is completely mundane and completely unurgent, but for some reason, for them, it's the most important thing and the most urgent thing? They just show up regardless of anything you are doing now. Are you busy? Aren't you busy? Never mind. I need your comment on this bug, or I need your comment on this design document. Okay, can it wait till, can it wait 30 minutes? I'm in the middle of something. No, it's urgent. It has to be now. And then you comment on it. 2 days later, okay, we got everyone's comments on this design document. Let's move forward. It would have made absolutely no difference if your comment would have come in now, 30 minutes later, or a day later. This is being toxic. Let's see a couple more examples from this episode. So Rick is obviously toxic, and toxic Rick is obviously even more toxic. It's in the name. He's Toxic Rick, and he does a whole lot of horrible things in this episode, but I want to zoom in on one really mundane but really neat example. Right in the beginning, when Toxic Rick and Toxic Morty kind of understand the situation and understand they are the toxins and they're stuck in this vat of toxins extracted from Rick and Morty and previous patients. Rick goes on a rant saying, I'm a genius. I don't have time for this. Expletive censored. Now, obviously being stuck in a vat of toxins is a very frustrating situation, but he isn't alone there, right? Toxic Morty is also stuck there. And if you take a closer look, there's a bunch of other toxic creatures stuck there, all in the same horrible situation. Now, Rick doesn't say this is a horrible situation. He doesn't say, let's solve this. He doesn't say this is unfair to us toxins. He goes on around saying, I'm a genius. I don't have time for this. He takes himself out of the group. He makes it all about himself. He makes himself special. So again, this probably doesn't apply to our day jobs because most of us don't get stuck in toxic vats. But this behavior is indicative of something. This is something a lot of us experience. Do any of you have a coworker who is a genius? Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. That's not the point. Do you have a coworker that thinks that the rules don't apply to them for some reason? People who don't read emails and need a special reminder saying, hey, there was an email sent out to the entire team 3 or 4 days ago. Did you see it? People who think they don't need to wait for code review because they are geniuses and they never have bugs. Spoiler alert, they do. It doesn't really matter. if if the social contract of your organization is to not read emails, well, it's probably a poor social contract. And if the social contract is people not reading emails, maybe you should stop using emails. But as long as everyone agrees that emails shouldn't be read, that's fine. That's what you all agreed on. If the social contract is that emails should be read and should be reacted to, someone taking themselves out of the equation because I'm a genius and I don't have time to read emails is being toxic, is implying, or actually not implying, explicitly saying that he's different and better than anyone else. This is toxic behavior. But let's go on with this episode because it's a goldmine. So Rick was obvious, toxic Rick was obvious. As I said, Rick is all about being toxic. That's his thing, even before this episode. But what about Morty? The show isn't called Rick's Adventures, it's called Rick and Morty. So in this episode, Morty, after being cleansed of his toxins, specifically his insecurities, works up the courage, asks out Jessica. They go to a very nice restaurant. And then Morty basically goes off in a full-on monologue. He's talking to Jessica, but is actually talking to himself. You kind of get the vibe that Jessica really isn't important to him. He really doesn't particularly care that she's there for him. This is just a situation of being on a date with Jessica as opposed to actually being on a date with Jessica and talking to her and interacting as people do on dates. Clearly toxic. And again, I don't want to talk about the dating world. I've been married for way too long for that. And well, we are talking about the work world, but have you ever had a so-called conversation with someone who's talking at you instead of speaking with you? Very toxic. Very obviously toxic. But enough about Rick and Morty. Again, it's a great episode. Go watch it. But let's stop basing our experience on cartoons, right? Let's talk about a couple of real-world examples and how these can actually happen to real humans who aren't cartoons in a science fiction series. In fact, I'll do even better than talking about generic real persons, real people. All of these examples are something or things that happened to me, that I was involved in. So, accidental toxicity in the real world. Prime example, which is very common, is having unclear communication and unclear expectations. Now, this case is perhaps going to be a bit extreme, but in some way, shape, or form, I do believe this happens to most people in some stage of their career. But before going into the example, just what am I talking about? So to clarify, we communicate all day long. And I'm not just talking about the very obvious explicit examples. So if you're in a meeting, you're obviously communicating with the other people in the meeting. If you're on a Zoom call, you're communicating with other people on the Zoom call. If you're writing an email, again, it's obvious. If you're chatting over Slack, again, it's obvious. But communication does not end there. Let's think about communication in the broadest terms possible. If you're authoring a pull request or merge request, depending on your terminology, you send it up there. Now you're communicating with the reviewer, and maybe not explicitly, hey, dear reviewer, please look at this, but this entire thing is a process of communication. And there's a huge difference between having the 5,000 lines of code just lumped together with no explanation, then taking the time, breaking this into 20 smaller commits, each one with its commit message that explains what you've been doing there, why you've been doing it, and what you hope to achieve. The end result, the exact 5,000 or 10,000 or whatever lines of code and the exact same functionality. But the way you structure it is all about communicating with the reviewer and the rest of the community if this is open source and you're just asking the world to review it. If you're filing a bug report, you're communicating with the person who's trying to fix it. Do you have all the logs? Do you have a clear series of steps to reproduce? Are these obvious to anyone who will look at this bug? Okay. There's a huge difference between opening a bug that says, spin up juice shop, log in, you'll see the problem, and here's the Docker file, here's how you run this application, here's a video showing the series of clicks I did on it, here's the error message. This is this exact same bug with very different styles of communication. One is clear, one isn't. So my examples obviously from the software engineering world, and feel free to translate them to whatever professional context you have, but in the broadest sense, if there is more than one person in whatever interaction, this is communication. And it is very easy to make communication very difficult and even toxic if you don't take the time and think about what you're communicating and how you're communicating above the actual words being said or written there. Okay, it sounds very broad and very vague. Here's a real life example. Several years back, I had a scheduled one-on-one meeting with one of my employees, and we were talking, and he mentioned he's very stressed and overwhelmed at work. Okay, fair enough. If this is how he feels, this is how he feels. But I was trying to understand why he feels so stressed and overwhelmed, because okay, it's not like we would clock out every day at 2 o'clock and go to the pub, but we did work hard. But at least in my opinion, we weren't overworked. We had a sustainable workload. And if I looked at him specifically, he wasn't working particularly hard or harder than anyone else on the team. It's kind of in the middle there. So I was trying to understand why was he feeling so stressed? Why was he feeling overwhelmed? So I did the easiest thing I could. I just asked. And he said something that really surprised me. He said, well, you keep emailing me and all all times of day during my off time, and I feel like I never have my alone time. I don't have any work-life balance because I keep getting these emails and I have to respond to them. And this caught me completely off guard. Not because of the facts. I'm not arguing about the facts. Back in the day, for all sorts of personal reasons I won't go into, I was indeed keeping a very peculiar work schedule that often wasn't aligned with the rest of the team, at least with some of the team, which is factually true. I'm not arguing with that, but in my mind, emails are an asynchronous method of communication. In my mind, I can send out an email when it's convenient for me to send it out. And my expectation, the social contract I attribute to emails, is that the person on the other side will read it and respond or do whatever's asked for them when it's convenient to them. Now, this employee came from a very different background than I had and had a completely different understanding. For him, if he gets an email from his manager, he's expected to respond ASAP, do whatever's written there without arguing, and in his mind also without complaining. It took a whole lot of courage for him in his mind to speak up on this. So this situation was kind of ridiculous. He was stressing himself out over unrealistic expectations in his mind that nobody else put on him except him. And I'm not about to victim shame here. At no point I'm saying this is his fault. This was completely my fault as a manager that I did not explicitly and clearly convey my expectations. So first of all, I apologized profusely. And since then, and this was, I think, almost a decade ago, on any email that I send out outside of normal work hours, I very explicitly state, hey, David, I know you aren't working today. Please see the information below and take care of it on Monday morning when you get back to work. Or even if it's not on an off time or off schedule for anyone, it's really easy to have different understandings. So I now state them explicitly. Hey Alice, please see the below. This is not urgent, but it is somewhat time sensitive. Please make sure you get to this by the end of the week. Really easy fix, takes less than a minute out of my day and makes a world of difference. And this is something which I'm sure happened to most of you, probably not to this extreme, but I'm sure most of you have been on at least one end of this accidental toxic behavior. Let's see another example. Let's talk about umbrellas. So few companies, quite a few managers ago, back in the day, in our team, we had a running gag that whenever any one of us was going into the scheduled one-on-one with our manager, we'd have an umbrella in our team. No, not a fancy branded Rick and Morty umbrella, just a plain old $2 umbrella, but we had this gag umbrella which we would pass from one to another whenever one of us went into this one-on-one meeting. Why would we do this? Well, there's a kind of disgusting saying in Hebrew, which I recently learned can also be used in English. I think I saw this on some TV show. Again, not Rick and Morty. But there's this saying that some people are so malicious and care so little about you that they will piss all over you and try to convince you that it's raining. Hence, the umbrella. Now, this person clearly did not literally piss on us. That would have been probably sexual harassment, which is definitely toxic and definitely not accidental. But the situation here is that around 70 or 80% of these scheduled, reoccurring meetings just didn't happen, or at least didn't happen in time. You could show up and get a, hey, can you just sit outside for a couple of minutes? I need to wrap something up. A couple of minutes being 40 out of an hour's scheduled meeting. You could make your way, get there and hear, oh, sorry, my previous meeting is running long, let's reschedule. Okay, things happen, but couldn't you have said this 10 minutes ago before I made my way over here? And so on and so forth. Again, being late in and as itself is not necessarily toxic. Things happen. We cannot perfectly plan our schedule 100% of the time. But if you see that habitually, regularly, 80% of the time, you don't make a meeting, and again, this was a senior manager. His entire job is schedule management. If you see that this does not work and you can't make this meeting, something is very wrong here. And here too, it's a really easy fix. If you have a 4 o'clock meeting that you never seem to make, move it to 4:30, move it to a different day, whatever. This is a solvable problem, an easily solvable problem. Not solving it may be incompetence. Not attempting to solve it, not recognizing the effect you have on other people who clear the schedule, take the time, prepare for this meeting, and are usually turned away because this meeting isn't happening or is happening late. That's toxic. Well, let's turn this around and stop dwelling on the negative. We talked quite a bit about toxic behaviors, like accidental toxic behaviors to be specific, and the negative effect they have on others. Let's flip this around. Let's end on a positive note. Can we fix it if we do not intend to be toxic, if this behavior is accidental? As software engineers, our instinct is to fix it. Can we? Well, truthfully, short answer, yes. Most definitely yes. Won't be easy, but it is definitely fixable. First thing you need to do is notice you have a problem. Or in fact, if we're talking about accidental toxicity, notice that you in this situation are the problem. At least your behavior is. If you're lucky, people will just outright, explicitly come up to you and tell you this. You need to be really lucky for this, or at least not lucky, you need to be in a fortunate situation, which is a lot of work. If you if you have already built strong enough relationships and are associated with people who care about these relationships, they will care enough to say to your face that you aren't behaving properly, that your behavior is becoming toxic. This is the easy situation. Usually, in most cases, you'll have to notice this by yourself without people telling you. It's harder to do, but if you aren't burying your head in the sand, it's usually quite possible. Are the people you work with avoiding you? Do they seem to be less enthusiastic about working with you? Do you come into a room and see the energy dropping? When you talk to them, do they answer in short monosyllable? I cannot speak English apparently. Do they answer in short sentences, yes and no, just to get this conversation over as fast as they can? If so, maybe you're being toxic. Maybe they see you as being toxic. You may not have intended to be, but the bottom line is maybe you are, because obviously this is the effect you have on people. Of course, if you're unsure, go ahead and ask. This is probably one of the hardest things you will do in any relationship, be it professional or otherwise. And it will probably be really hard for the person on the other side to answer truthfully. But ask, it is worth it. And if you get an answer, great. If you don't get an answer, well, kind of expected. But not getting an answer sometimes speaks volumes on its own right. And once you have this suspicion that something here isn't right, really start looking. There's no clear-cut toxicity detector, unfortunately, but more often than not, it won't really be that difficult to understand what's going on. Once you've recognized this, apologize. Please start by apologizing. And this is critical. You need to convey the sentiment that you understood what you were doing that is perceived as toxic by others. You did not intend to do this. You did not intend to create a toxic environment. And you are sorry about this. This sounds easy, but it often isn't. The tricky part is to get this right. First of all, you need to genuinely apologize, genuinely be sorry. None of this, I'm sorry that you misunderstood me. No, that's assigning blame on others when the blame should be on you. you can try to explain, but it's really difficult to explain without the explanation deteriorating to an excuse. And if you're going to make excuses, you aren't apologizing, so don't. If you can explain in neutral terms how your perception of the situation was different, do it. But don't deteriorate into excuses, and definitely don't make this anyone else's fault. Now, going back to the episode, to rest and relaxation. So there's a scene there when they come out of the detoxifier. Rick goes on and this entire explanation to the machine operator why he was such a jerk to them before they went into the machine, which kind of sounds like an apology, but it really isn't. He goes on this whole speech, which is essentially designed to make him feel better, not the machine operator. So don't be a Rick. Don't apologize for your own benefit. If you had a bad day, this is no excuse for being a jerk to everyone around you. It may explain it, it does not justify it. And at the end of the day, no one cares about why you're being a jerk. They will care about the fact that you are being a jerk. Don't be a Rick. Now, once you apologized, it doesn't end there. That's just the beginning. After you apologize, you talk the talk, you have to walk the walk. You have to modify your toxic behavior, which you promise to change. There's one trick that people sometimes use here, which I'm kind of hesitant to bring up, but I will for completeness sake. So one of the biggest problems with being accidentally toxic is that it is accidental. You didn't mean to be toxic, but your behavior was. And since it was an accident, it's probably hard to notice that you're doing it because this wasn't intentional. So some people like to enlist the help of others. So, okay, I promise to change, I promise to stop doing whatever I was doing, but keep me honest, and if I do this again, tell me. There is a merit to this because people are social creatures, and you are making this about the relationship. You are saying, hey, this behavior affects us both negatively. Let's try and solve it together. But you need to be really careful with this. You need to be really careful not to shift the responsibility off to someone else. It is your toxic behavior that got this whole thing started. You need to take the responsibility and really do your best effort to resolve it. Now, if someone points out that you missed something, that you kept doing this unintentionally, that's fabulous, and thank them for this. But don't count on them. Don't make it their responsibility and go on with your day-to-day life until someone calls you out. That makes your apology disingenuous, and it makes your attempt to fix the situation disingenuous. Don't do it. And with that, I think I'm almost done, so let's wrap up. There's this rule of thumb that From a 30-minute talk, people will remember one sentence. I've been going on for about 45 minutes, so maybe just half a sentence that people will remember. If you take anything away from this talk, please remember this. Different behaviors can be understood and experienced differently for different people. Things that you're doing that may seem inconsequential or even favorable to you may seem negative or even toxic to other people around you. And it's true that there's a huge difference between being toxic on purpose, between being a bully or being a jerk, than accidentally doing something that's toxic to others. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. For the person on the other side, the behavior is just as toxic. So if you need to take just one thing away, it's not about you in one sentence. It's about how your behaviors are perceived and how they affect others. And if others view these behaviors as toxic, it doesn't matter what your intention was. It's up to you to change them. It's up to you to fix this. Because this relationship is yours to make or break. With that, I think I'm really done. I hope the ideas I proposed here resonate with you, or at the very least, I hope you see these as better ideas than a vat of acid. If any of this does resonate with you, if you do find this interesting, please let's continue this conversation. By all means, don't be a stranger. Shoot me out an email, find me on Twitter, find me on LinkedIn. I'm really not a difficult person to find. Be my guest, reach out. Let's continue talking about that. And now I'm actually done. I'll just say thank you for listening. Thank you for your time. Don't be a Rick and enjoy SciFiDevCon.